to the Daily Dawg podcast. It is Saturday, September 27th. This is week 5 of the 2025 season, and it is finally game day. It is Saturday in Athens, and it is time for the big showdown between Alabama and Georgia. We've been talking about this all week, and this is one of the biggest games of the season. It may not be all that determinative, as we've talked about, meaning that last year's game didn't really decide much of anything in the SEC or nationally. Georgia lost the game to Alabama on the road at Alabama, and yet still went on to win the SEC championship and go to the playoff. Alabama, on the other hand, did not contend for the SEC championship and did not make the playoff. So the winner of the game was not very much determinative of anything, and that may be the case again this year, because this is early in the season yet. Georgia facing their second in a row of tough opponents after a couple relatively easy openers. Alabama has already been on the road and lost to FSU, and more on that in a moment because we have some updates to that idea we want to talk about. And who's in the more precarious position, or what is this going to determine? Well, for Alabama, it could be more determinative. If they take a second loss here today, it certainly puts them behind the 8 ball in the race for the playoffs. Like we've been talking about, we think that the work that you have to do, the resume that you need to set up in the regular season now in this modern era of college football, is you certainly would do well to win your conference and claim the automatic seed. That is a guarantee. But failing that, probably if you're playing in the SEC, Big Ten, maybe in the ACC and the Big 12, you need to win 10 or 12 games, or you need to win 10 games. If you can go 10-2, then you'll be in the discussion. Not a guarantee you'll make the playoff because it's all going to be relative to those other teams, but you'll certainly be in the discussion and you'll be in the right place. So obviously, if Alabama were to go ahead and take a second loss here, it'd still only be their first loss in the SEC, which means they'd have a decent chance, if they perform well in the rest of the season, of still fighting their way back in the SEC championship. Making that game would help their resume a lot. Winning that game would get them the automatic bid. So obviously, nothing is going to end for Alabama, even if they take a loss here. But taking that loss will give them that second loss, and it means they have very little margin for error. They have to consider running the table on a schedule that still has, I think, up to 6 ranked teams after this on their schedule. Not to mention, it's an SEC schedule. So up to this point, Alabama has not played an SEC game. This will be their SEC opener. Georgia's already obviously played an SEC game, and that game was against another potential contender for the SEC and for the playoffs in Tennessee. And a team that a lot of people think, even after losing to Georgia at home in what everybody's now calling an instant classic game, Tennessee may yet still work their way into either the SEC championship and or the playoffs. Most people actually came out of that game feeling like Tennessee was every bit in as good a position after the game as they were before the game. That's probably not the case for Alabama this time. And this won't be the case for Georgia either. If Georgia loses this game today, they'll not be in a better position or the same position they were in. Right now, they're number 5, as we've talked about. And while we didn't really move up any in stature or position, meaning that if you talk to most experts around the country and say who's going to make the playoff, Georgia's in that list. And most people have them slotted anywhere from about 4 to 8 as far as what the seedings would be in the 12-team playoff. And that was kind of where Georgia was to start the season. But most people will tell you that they actually have more confidence in Georgia as a legitimate contender now because of the performance of the offense and Gunnar Stockton last game at Tennessee. So losing this game would certainly put Georgia down a notch. There's a whole bunch of teams in the SEC that are also contending, and out of this weekend, several teams are going to emerge undefeated, some of them with a big leg up. There's going to be a big game today between LSU and Ole Miss. The winner of that game, neither of those teams has taken a loss yet. LSU is a team that people were really high on after they went on the road to start the season, beat Clemson at Clemson, and won the battle of who's the real Death Valley, like we talked about before. And then they beat Florida. And even as they were beating Florida, I think we could tell that the wheels were coming off at Florida. I saw somebody, I think it was Seth Emerson this week in The Athletic, one of his columns said that or maybe it was Stuart Mandel, either one. I do think it was an article in The Athletic, and somebody referred to LSU's resume as looking like it came off the printer fresh but was dragged through the mud, and or referencing their 2 signature wins in Clemson and LSU, that those have aged like rancid wine. That's pretty harsh, but it's true. this is that relative sport we keep talking about. So today you're all excited. You beat a team that you really wanted to beat, that people said this is a measuring stick, that's maybe a top rival. And then as the season goes on, maybe that win doesn't look so good. I've said this many a time. I'm not that concerned about what the team is when ranked wise when we play them. And a lot of times I gauge these wins not on saying, oh, look, we beat number 10 or we beat number 15. I tend to gauge them on where I really think that team is going to come out towards the end of the season, because that's what's going to matter at the end. And yet I do see people overlook it. I think it's funny how often as we get to the end of the season, we're talking about playoffs and teams are pitching their position and promoting whether or not they should be in the playoff or not. They'll point to their resume and say, well, we beat number 4 and number 8, and it's like, yeah, but neither of those teams finished 4th or 8. One of them finished unranked, having, only been the second game of the season when you played them. And it turns out they had a terrible season. And the other one finished ranked, 12th. So, I'm not going to give you a credit for playing number 4 and number 8 at the time you played them. That doesn't matter at all. What was that team when we evaluate them by the end of the season? And there we go, right? Keeps being the rub we're talking about. Data, wins, everything you look at becomes relative as the season goes, and we really don't get the full picture to the end of the season, which is why I think we enjoy and spend so much time speculating and talking about college football as college football fans throughout the season, because no other sport is perception. I mean, I guess the only other thing you could say that's a sport that has perception of what people think about the performance is as important would be the sports like gymnastics or something where judging comes into play, right? You think you did a great routine, but it's all a matter of what the judge says when you're a gymnast. Well, it's not exactly that. Obviously, you can control some of your performance on the field, and you can put a product out there where you say, look, we went 12-0 and we won our conference. And yes, like we've been talking about, in almost every era of college football for the last 45 years, the bowl and pole era, the BCS era, the 4-team playoff, and now the multi-team playoff, or I guess 4 teams are multi, but you know what I mean, the expanded playoff, I guess we'll call it, right now at 12 and probably soon coming to 16 teams. In every era of the playoff, winning your conference and going undefeated or both will usually get you seriously in that discussion about who's the last team standing or has a shot to play for or gets voted national champion. And voting is still a big part of this. Although now with the playoff, we do get it sorted on the field, right? Ultimately, the teams are going to work their way through that 12-team playoff. You could have 3 or 4 games to win the whole thing, like Ohio State did last year. They played 4 because they were not a number 1 seed. They had to work their way, or they were not a bye seed. They didn't win their conference. They had to come off of a disappointing loss to end the season from outside the conference championship status and come in and win 4 games, and they did it. But so you can win it on the field, but you still got to get there. Ohio State still had to be one of those 12 teams that got in the playoff. And the good news for them is they only lost 2 games. So they were one of those 10-2 teams, and it was hard to ignore their talent and their overall resume as a leading contender of a leading conference with that 10-2 record, even though the disappointment level was quite high, both nationally and within Ohio State Nation. So we're talking about that again as a reminder of that's where we got to be, right? So what happens today when we lose? Well, we still have a strong chance, like Ohio State, to, focus on the rest of our schedule, get a couple impressive wins, hopefully have no more than 1 loss. We probably wouldn't win the conference if we ended up with 2 losses, but we'll still be penciled into the playoff. And if we're talented enough, get the right matchups, and play well in the playoffs, despite whatever happens in the regular season, well, then we will have a chance to win it on the field. But so the margin for error is much bigger. Okay, you can lose up to 2 games, pretty much, we think, in a standard way. And there'll probably be some teams, there's going to be 9-3 teams. It's all going to depend on record and perception and discussion. And that's why we're talking about it, because it's a matter of perception. So Georgia will lose stature in perception if they can't win this game today. And especially, what'll be interesting, I suppose, is whether people would look at it and say, well, it's just Alabama. Georgia beats everybody but Alabama, and we've talked about that this week. 55-5 in the last 5 years, with 3 of those losses to Alabama. So we've only lost to 2 teams in the last 5 years that aren't Alabama. So Alabama is definitely the problem. So I'm not sure that that even is. Maybe the voters out there would have enough conscience to look at that and say, well, it's an Alabama problem. It's not that they're not one of the best teams in the country and can beat anybody any given day. And that's probably still true. So who knows? But that's the bottom line, right? It's about perception. These games are building your resume, and it's hard to know for sure as the season goes on what you're going to need on that resume. But if you're Alabama, you're going to feel tense about already having 2 losses and feeling like you're right at that line where anything else going against you and you're going to be eliminated from the playoffs. For Georgia, it reduces your margin of error down. You look at the rest of the season schedule where you still have Ole Miss on the schedule. You still have Texas on the schedule. You have what looks like a tough out in Georgia Tech, and that's not going to determine the conference, but it's still going to matter in the playoff. That's the great thing about college football. Everything matters, right? So a non-conference game in pro sports probably means nothing, because only thing that matters to get into your playoff is winning your conference or coming in a certain position, maybe for some sort of a wild card. And in this case, and that's still going to always come down to conference records, well, that Georgia Tech game matters. And right now, that's shaping up like maybe we'll get there, and this game is going to mean something for both teams like it hasn't meant in forever. Maybe even Georgia Tech's in consideration for the playoff, and maybe it's going to come down to both teams, the winner of that game. Even though we're not in the same conference anymore, since Tech left, went to be an independent for a while, decided that it was just too life in the SEC. It was just not what they wanted. Probably a decision that didn't work out so well for them, really, in the long run. But that's a story for another day. They left the SEC, though. They were an independent for a while. Now they're in the ACC. And frankly, they have a decent chance to show up. The way they've been playing, if they can continue playing like they are now, they have a decent chance to be a team in the ACC playoff or the conference championship game, and maybe win the ACC, get an automatic bid to the playoffs after all. If not, if they can get to 11-1 or 10-2, then they're certainly in that conversation again among at-large teams. But if they've already got 2 losses by the time they get to the Georgia game, and it's hard to say. Everybody's kind of widely acknowledged with their schedule the way it looks right now. They should be favored in every game on their schedule except for the Georgia game. So if they get to the Georgia game and it comes down to having to win that game to push them over the playoff, well, we could be in that same position too. And especially if we were to lose this game today, we could stomp through the rest of the schedule, look pretty good. Wins against Texas and Ole Miss are probably going to be meaningful. But if we have a loss out of today, and especially depending on how that loss looks, depending on how Alabama ages across the season, then, that game might be a possible playoff elimination game for both teams. It could be a lot on the line, could be a lot of stakes. And look, I'm excited about that. I've said this before. I want Georgia Tech to be one of the best teams in the country. I would rather everybody in the country is watching the Georgia Tech game on the Friday after Thanksgiving. And I think it's a great slot. I hope we keep playing that game there. You get a national audience all to yourself on a holiday. And I just think that that's a fantastic thing if we can make this rivalry like the Florida State rivalry used to be in the 90s, where it was must-see TV. Everybody in the country tuned in to watch that game because you were watching 2 of the best teams in the country play. You were watching 2 teams that were likely vying for a chance to get into whatever the system was at the time for the national championship. And we did see it happen. We actually saw a Florida State rematch in the national championship once. So I want to see that kind of a thing evolve with the Georgia Tech rivalry. So I'm rooting for them. Go Jackets. Win the rest of your games. I still want to kick your butt when you get to the Georgia game, and it's going to be much more satisfying when their expectations are high and when their belief is riding at the top of their possible egos. But to take them back down a peg, that'll be the most fun you could possibly have as a Georgia fan, is to make that Tech rivalry game mean everything to both teams and then take it away from them. That's what college football is all about, right? Beating your rivals. So here we are today at the Alabama game, and we've talked about the fact that Alabama is not a traditional rival in the sense that, yes, they're the number 1 and number 2 best teams in the all-time history of the SEC. by most any measure. But Alabama has that clear number one. I mean, they're in a class by themselves. Then it's Georgia. I think just having done enough in recent years to kind of eke out ahead of a pack that includes LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee and Florida when you talk about SEC greatness. And then you have that pack of the teams behind Georgia. So here we are at this game, and this game has been a problem for us. Despite the fact that we have won multiple SEC championships and multiple national championships in Kirby's 10-year run, and even back into Mark Richt's run with SEC championships and at least contending or getting in position for a national championship. But at least one of those potential national championships in the Mark Richt era was taken away by losing the Georgia-Alabama game that season. And that was, of course, as we've talked about multiple times this week, in the 2012 SEC championship game. So again, this game is unlikely to take away the ultimate prize from either team. Both teams will still be in contention. Might be a little harder for Alabama, but it is a perception game. Everybody's looking to see, what is Alabama? They lost to Florida State and to start the season, and people thought, well, look, this could be a signal that Florida State is back. And yet it still was a troubling loss because Alabama didn't look particularly good doing it. And by not looking good, I don't mean that they weren't crisp and they had a bunch of turnovers. I mean, they just looked like they got beat for energy and passion, fire, what our mottos are this year. It looked like Florida State wanted the game more and whipped them at both lines. And so, that created a lot of concern. But then Alabama's come back out and they've looked much more energetic and passionate, although admittedly against lesser competition. So they played one, legitimate, plausible playoff contending team, and then two not anywhere near contending teams. And they've piled up some stats and stuff that we've looked at and talked about. Georgia's done the same thing. We played two teams that are kind of like warm-up games to start the season in Marshall and Austin Peay. None of the fans came out of those games feeling super electric about it because we didn't show off a lot of dynamicism. We didn't fly up and down the field and feature high-powered offense. And the defense, though, did look sharp. They did play with the fire, passion, energy. They stonewalled both teams and largely prevented them from even getting but just about 200 yards a game. And we gave up 7 points in one game late against third and fourth stringers, and a total of 6 points off 2 field goals in the other game. But then we played Tennessee, and Tennessee was able to put up nearly 500 yards of offense and 38 points in regulation, 41 points overall for the game. And now you have a lot of consternation about the defense. Coming into the Tennessee game, everybody was worried about the offense and Gunnar Stockton. Now everybody's worried about the defense. And it's true, the defense didn't get any substantial pressure in the Tennessee game. Tennessee was able to take advantage of that lack of pressure and get a lot of downfield plays. Although, as we've been talking about, those downfield plays, I'll say this. I thought about one thing I hadn't said yet, but I've said it, but I didn't say it directly. So here's the direct statement. Coming into the Tennessee game, I specifically said, look, I don't know if Joey Aguilar, the transfer from App State, forget that he spent 5 seconds at UCLA having a cup of coffee without playing. He transferred from App State, basically. He played a couple of years at App State where he threw or at least led or tied the nation in the most interceptions thrown during that time period. And so there he was at App State. He was an experienced quarterback, put up some good yards, helped them win some games, but also put them in trouble a lot of times by having a number of interceptions and not being careful with the ball. Was on nobody's radar as somebody referenced. Some national writers and people talked about him being literally like a 0-star prospect. He had to fight his way into anybody even letting him play football at all. So, and why is that? Well, he's obviously can be an accurate passer. He's obviously a gamer, and he certainly can read he can read defenses and play the game at quarterback, knows how to, get his team going, but he doesn't have the biggest and strongest arm. And so a lot of those downfield shots that we've seen both coming into the Georgia game and against Georgia were basically just jump balls. He just threw them up. But to his credit, sometimes just taking a chance in life is what matters, right? So he took a chance, and more often than not, it worked. He threw a jump ball up when he did have pressure in his face near the end of the first half, and we easily intercepted it. But that didn't turn out to matter that much. As it worked out, there wasn't a lot of time. We got a penalty. We couldn't get in field goal range even to just put a field goal on the board before the half. So that interception didn't cost him much. And He threw another interception in the second half, and that really wasn't so much of the fact that he just threw a jump ball. A receiver fell down, might have not been an accurate pass, and we were able to step in front of it and intercept the ball. But the other times he put the ball up in the air for jump balls, and for all the world, it looked like we would either at least have a play on the ball and knock it away, maybe intercept it. At 50-50, you think, well, at least some of these we should win that play, and they should win that play. Well, they won all of them in that game. And that is one of the big keys in that game. They did not consistently run the ball. They did not consistently move the ball in extended drives like we talked about. They only had one drive that was over 3 minutes in the whole game. So they mostly were able to win those 50-50 balls multiple times, at least 3 times that we all can remember, plus a total busted coverage on another quick hitting drive. And so they racked up a bunch of points on quick hitters. And they were not able to sustain drives, but they won every 50-50 ball. So was that bad luck on our part or bad play? Well, we don't know yet. Again, not enough data. So we already broke down and we went through yesterday and we talked about the matchups between Alabama and Georgia. We talked about, look, every time I come to one of these games and it's time to make predictions, I break it down logically. We don't have enough data. And if this was a baseball season, we're halfway through the baseball season, I would start going through and I would talk about run differential and I would talk about, what the offense has done, what how the defense is playing, what are the 3 phases of the game for pitching, defense, hitting in baseball. We would look at a number of different stats, and a lot of those stats, even a third of the way through baseball season, because they play 162 games and you get so much data to work with, you can start to extrapolate trends. It's very hard to extrapolate any meaningful trend out of data when you only have 3 games out of 12. And 12 is barely enough to create enough data points with the way this data goes to really draw something out. So we have to look at what we're doing this year and doing last year. So what are those data points? Well, how do we break down the game? So we talked about this yesterday. So we look at the matchups, Georgia offense versus the Bama defense. And I told you that I think the Georgia offense will win, and I defined winning, meaning that I'm not saying for sure we're going to fly up and down the field and have 500, 550 yards and 40 points. What I'm saying is, what I like about this offense after 3 games, we always talk about how Georgia plays its game regardless of the opponent. This offense has been remarkably consistent. They are grinding out yards, holding on to the ball, in the top 5 in the nation in time of possession. Every game we've had at least 430 yards. We've been between 430 yards and 502 yards in all 3 games. Just very consistent. We're holding the ball. We're getting about 76 or more plays in the Tennessee game because of the way their offense plays. We had 87 plays, but we're right at 70, 75, 76 plays in the other 2 games. So we're holding the ball while limiting the other team to around 50 plays. Now Tennessee ended up with 70 plays. So again, both teams had a lot more plays with the ball. But in the end, Georgia is holding the ball longer time of possession, more plays. That's helping it with the game control concept, the complementary football that Kirby likes. And this offense really does reflect probably some of the best of what Kirby would like to see the team do, which is be multiple and varied. At times we've seen, like the opening drive of the 3rd quarter against Tennessee, we've seen them just decide to run on every play. And they did that in a couple drives against the lesser opponents too. Just like, okay, we're going to emphasize it. We're going to run. We're going to ram this ball down your throat and we're going to score with a run. And they've done that. And at other times they put the ball downfield, not so much against Austin Peay and Marshall, but we saw multiple downfield pass-driven drives in the Tennessee game. So we know Gunner can do it, and some of those throws were spectacular. So now I think what you look at, and you see there's even a little bit of Heisman love for Gunner, right? Gunner is completing over 70% of his passes. Gunner is cranking up when you look at his passing totals, over 200 yards a game, and then his running totals, 40 to 70 yards a game. He's de-emphasized the running in a couple games, run more in others. When you put it all together, he's scoring typically 1 touchdown a game at least running, and maybe 2 passing on average. So, this is a guy who's generating 250 to 300 or more yards of offense a game. He's doing it maybe quarter to 30% on the ground, the rest in the air. He's really hard to stop because of that. And the Georgia offense rarely is working from behind the chains. We just haven't seen a lot of drives where you have a lot of 3rd and 18, 3rd and 12, 2nd and 17 kind of plays, because we're not losing yardage. We're not always getting, he's not always getting the right play, or no, he's not always getting the biggest play. But even when he pulls out of the pocket a little too quick, tucks the ball and takes off, he's getting 2, 3, 5, 8 yards. So at least one play I went back and looked at where there was probably a bigger downfield pass that he bypassed because he left the pocket early, he got 8 yards. So, it was a first down play, and now it's 2nd and 2. Well, yeah, I would have loved to have seen the 30-yard downfield pass. Maybe that dynamic receiver playmaker downfield actually breaks free and has a long touchdown. Gunner is unlikely to take off with the ball and run for 50 or 55 yards. I mean, we might see it, but I doubt it. In fact, I was listening to, and I heard David Pollack on the radio yesterday at 680 The Fan. David Pollack was talking about having a round of golf with Jake Fromm. And Pollack said he was glad to, as a Georgia fan and watcher, he was glad to see that we have a quarterback who can gain some yards, who can actually run the ball. And I think that was meant to be a jab at Jake Fromm, because Fromm was not fleet of foot. And so I think Fromm, according to Pollack, Fromm said, yeah, but Gunner's not fast. And, as much as we've been excited about Gunner running the ball, it's true, he does not look especially fast. In fact, I saw some highlights and clips just going through something the other day of some of the plays, especially when I was looking at Tennessee, building up to the Tennessee game. I saw some of those clips of like Stetson taking off, and when scoring the first touchdown a couple of years ago against Tennessee, when they had been all trying to call him and disturb him, the Tennessee fans got his cell phone number and he did the call me gesture after scoring the first touchdown. On that touchdown, he dropped back to pass, got flushed out of the pocket, ran a long way behind the line of scrimmage to eventually get out ahead of the line of scrimmage and hit the pylon. And he looked quick. I'd kind of forgot. I know Stetson was always willing to take off and run, but I forgot he could be that quick. And Gunner, when he takes off and runs, he looks more tough than he looks quick. Nobody's given me a gun, a radar gun on him yet, or told me exactly what his 40-yard dash time is. But Gunner runs tough, probably more so than he runs fast. So point is, I think that the Georgia offense is going to be able to consistently move the ball, even though the Alabama defense has been statistically good so far this year. But I will say two things that are concerning about the Alabama defense. People have made a big point about the Georgia defense not getting any pressure and only having 4 sacks. And it's true. You look back over the last 10 years or so, we've never been one of the top sack teams in the sense that, there's some years where you see teams out there 40, 50 sacks. They're getting 3, 4 sacks a game. So our team is typically hovering in the really, even the best defenses. One of the 21 or 22 teams had over 40-something sacks, but every other team has had somewhere between 25 and probably 37 sacks on the season. So that puts us in the upper third, maybe, or at least upper half in the country in terms of sacks, but that's not usually been the thing. And Kirby has always explained that. What he wants to see, he used to call it havoc plays, creating havoc on defense. He talks about making the quarterback move his feet or disrupt the quarterback and disrupt his timing. And I think we all have watched enough football to know, yeah, that's what's key. You don't have to get back there and sack the quarterback every game or every play. But what you have to do is you have to make him consistently uncomfortable. And if you can speed up his timing, if he starts moving a little too fast, giving up on his reads a little too quick, not setting his feet quite right, then he makes more inaccurate throws. Then he takes shorter downfield throws. Then you start keeping the ball in front of you, and you see an offense that maybe even if they get some plays and they gain some yardage and even some first downs, they don't go anywhere and they don't score any points. And you see that happen a lot. You look at quarterback play. A lot of times Georgia has taken away the run. When you look at the stats of the games over the last 10 years, Georgia has denied the run. The other team has gone to the air. They maybe threw it 45 times, maybe completed 20 or 30 of those passes, sometimes even 30. But a lot of times you'll see a quarterback came into the game averaging 300 yards a game passing, comes out of the Georgia game with 152 yards passing on 45 attempts. Georgia does a great job of disrupting their rhythm and making them do something different than what they want to do. And so I think that's what we're looking for from our defense. And you say, well, is that what Alabama's defense does? Well, I can't say for sure, but what I can say is two things that trouble me or would worry me if I'm an Alabama fan in their defensive stats is while they are holding teams to about 246 yards a game so far in the 3 games, that's excellent. While they are holding teams to 15 points a game, that's by the end of the season, that's going to be an elite number if you can stay there. They are yielding nearly 40, 45% third down conversion, and they too are not getting any pressure. They've only got 4 sacks on the season. So also I looked, they have like 17 tackles for loss, and we only have like 14. But they had 12 tackles for loss in the Louisiana Monroe game. I think I kept saying yesterday Northeast Louisiana, and honestly I confuse those all the time, and who cares? It doesn't make that big a difference. Northeast Louisiana is a team that sometimes plays SEC teams, so is Louisiana Monroe. Alabama played Louisiana Monroe, and they beat them 73-0. But that game piled a lot of stats in Alabama's favor in terms of choking down the yardage, and they had 12 tackles for loss of their 17 on the season in that one game. And they had 2 of the sacks that they had in that one game. So Alabama's defense has been, again, we're kind of both in the same boat. Alabama maybe a little bit more like, okay, they played Florida State and they lost. They didn't lose because of the defense, but the defense also didn't help them win. Florida State was able to consistently put points on the board, driving the ball down the field. We talked about that. It wasn't just that Florida State got a bunch of turnovers and Alabama made a bunch of mistakes. Florida State scored on half of their possessions and drove the ball consistently down the field. They only ended up with 382 yards for the game. So they didn't, it wasn't a 500-yard onslaught. They didn't embarrass the Alabama defense, but the Alabama defense was never able to step up and make Florida State do something that wasn't going to allow them to control the game, and Florida State did. So I think the Georgia offense against the Bama defense can win in the sense that there's no reason to think that we can't continue to grind out yards, make first downs, score on 40 to 50 to 60% of our drives, and put pressure on Alabama and put ourselves in a position. The offense ought to be able to do enough to have us win this game. That doesn't mean they will do it and win the game. I'm saying there's nothing that shows me that they can't succeed enough in our game plan to put enough points on the board, hold the ball long enough, and grind out enough to win the game. So I think the Georgia offense can win in its objectives against the Alabama defense. What about the Georgia defense against the Alabama offense? That's a little dicier. Alabama comes into the game with a quarterback who was a highly desired quarterback who's playing at an elite level. Even against Florida State, he was not the reason they lost. He was under a lot of pressure, and the Florida State did to him what I just described Georgia often does to teams. They made him take short passes. He threw the ball a ton, 40-something passes. He got 200-something yards, but they kept the passes short, and they kept him in front of him. He only averaged 5.3 yards a pass attempt. That's not good. We talk elite is 9 or above, 10 or 13 above. So even 7 or 8 would show better progress. 5.3 yards per play or per pass on 40-something yard passes. The defense has definitely won in that category. You ended up putting up yardage. You completed over 50% of your passes. But most coaches defensively will say, especially against a good quarterback like Ty Simpson, they'll say they won. Now, after that, in the next 2 games, Ty Simpson, has been able to go out there and put up almost perfect performances, 14 of 14 to start one game, 17 of 17 in another game, and something, like he's only missed 3 or 4 passes in 2 games. But again, consider the competition. So with that in mind, now the Georgia defense, though, has not been able to get pressure a lot this season either. Only 4 sacks and 14 tackles for losses. In our first 2 games, we averaged 6 tackles for losses. Against Tennessee, we only got 2 tackles for loss. So if that trend continues, that's going to be problematic. If we're not able to get pressure and we don't get tackles for losses, unless we just truly stop everything right at the line, and that's where the statistical anomaly comes up. That's not so much losses and sacks, but just a lot of 1 and 2 and 0 yard plays. And the Georgia defense is capable of that. Then the Alabama offense might be successful. They're converting at a rate of about 47% on the year on third downs. They're averaging 460 yards a game, which is less than Tennessee, but I do think their quarterback skill set is more elite, and I think their wide receiver skill set is more elite. And yet their style of offense is more one that plays into the way we play defense. So I think there's a good chance just in terms of matchups. This is one of those matchup moments that I keep talking about. Just in terms of matchups, I think this is a better matchup defensively for Georgia than Tennessee was. And I think Georgia's defense is more likely to be successful because of that matchup. And then just the gut instinct part of this, equation is, and there's nothing to back this other than this is how I feel. But I think that this team, I'm seeing the character of this team as being a team where we're going to see stars, people that we come to expect either at the end of this year or next year, that right now we're not necessarily locked in on, like, oh, this guy's a future. Sometimes you have guys on your team. The whole time Jalen Carter was on our team, you referred to him as future first round draft pick Jalen Carter. The moment he stepped on campus, that's what he was. Every time he got on the field, even if he could only play 10 snaps, the 10 snaps he was on there, he was disruptive. He was a force to be reckoned with, and you could see it. And that just culminated in the LSU SEC championship game when he famously just picks up the LSU quarterback instead of throwing him to the ground, because he got there, he got pressure, he just grabs him and picks him up in the air until the whistle blows, set him down. It was ridiculous, and he did it one-handed because he was pushing people out of his way with the other hand. He is a monster. Okay. And Jordan Davis, shout out to Jordan Davis, by the way. Okay. He was a monster in the middle for Georgia, and he was disruptive, but he was a big guy who could run, and he actually got out there and brought quarterbacks down on the edge once in a while. Well, he just showed it. Apparently he'd been getting a little heavier in the pros, but he has conditioned himself. He's lost some weight. He said he's feeling great. Well, he looked great. He solidified the Philadelphia Eagles game last week by busting through the middle on a potential game-winning field goal from the other team. He stuffed the field goal and then picked up the ball himself and ran the distance for a game-sealing touchdown the other way, and was clocked on the radar gun in that, doing almost 20 miles an hour, like 19 point something miles an hour, which for a man who's like 300 plus pounds and 6'5", that's 6'4", or whatever he is, that is unbelievable and scary, right? Like, that guy is going almost 20 miles an hour down the field at his weight and size. That's like getting in front of a truck if you wanted to. You're not going to tackle that. So kudos to Jordan Davis, but these are the kind of disruptors we've had. And this is what we're talking about. I'm not saying we don't have, well, I don't think we have that kind of talent. Although Jordan Hall was referred to in his recruiting, and when he came to campus, he hasn't emerged as that guy yet on D-line, but he was thought of as the next Jordan Davis. He has that kind of build. He has that kind of potential, that kind of power, I think. And he's been injured a lot of his career at Georgia, and we're waiting for him to emerge. And that's my point I'm getting at, is I think if this season is successful, as we hope it will be, and what I think might start to happen is there's a lot of guys who just haven't had a chance to make themselves that household name. But maybe this year, as the season goes on, Jordan Hall emerges. Christian Miller is being talked about, but maybe he emerges more. Raylan Wilson, we talked about these guys yesterday, C.J. Allen, Chris Cole. If you start to become more familiar with these names than you are now, then that's because they're going to be making plays today and the rest of the season. And we'll start to see what has always been true on the Georgia defense, which is throughout the season, maybe today is Jordan Hall's day or Christian Miller's day, that they do something really amazing and noticeable. Think like the Nazir Stackhouse game against Missouri a couple of years ago, where, he gets the strip, the fumble, he causes I think it was a quarterback strip sack, and he gets the ball and he almost runs for the touchdown the other way. Sort of a signature play. That's what we're looking for. We want to see some of these guys emerge. They have the talent and the capability, but they're younger. And that was another thing I heard. I think David Pollack, I made mention of this yesterday, mentioned on the interview he was doing with 680 Fan. This is probably the youngest Georgia team that we've seen in a while. And I think that's where this season's going to hinge. That's where this game's going to hinge. Are the young guys going to continue to step up and make a name for themselves? Last game out, we saw it happen with Gunnar Stockton. Gunnar Stockton was an elite talent as a recruit. He's been learning the Georgia system for a while. He's a guy that we, should have had some faith in all along, as at least being that next man up and having the potential. And he showed it when he stepped in to at least win the SEC championship and give us a chance against Notre Dame in the playoff. But, everybody's always looking for the shiny, better thing, especially at quarterback. But the question was, can Gunnar be the guy? Well, Gunnar emerged as a potential, not just a guy who at least won't make mistakes, but as a guy who can win you a game in a tough and unbelievable environment. That's what we saw last week. Well, it's time to see some of those defenders in the same way Gunnar was challenged. And I'm not saying he took it personally and he just went out there and played well because everybody doubted him. But I think this may be the way this season may flow. My gut instinct is today is a day where the defense we see some of those names emerge, and they do a few things because they definitely know that they got torched last time out. It may have just been on a handful of plays, not consistently, but they won some plays, they lost some plays. Well, the lost plays were very dramatic. And also the fact that there hasn't been much pressure. And we've seen this before from the Georgia defense. We've seen where we got to this point in the season before, or maybe even a little deeper, and we said, Georgia's not getting any pressure. And then maybe they were on pace. Like I said, you're going to end up somewhere between 25 and 35, 37 sacks on the season with a typical Georgia defense. Well, right now we've got 4 through 3 games. So you look at the 12-game regular season and you extrapolate that out. You say we're on pace for 16 sacks? That's terrible, right? It is. So that's got to step up. So if that's going to step up, maybe we see that some today. And like I said, I don't think the key is sacking Ty Simpson. I don't think I care at all if we sack him, but I do want to see him be disrupted. I want to see us do what Florida State did to him. I want to see him be disrupted. I want to see him off schedule. I want to see him take short passes. If we can make him throw a little bit off schedule and keep the ball in front of us, even if he gets the ball to Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams and the other pass catchers that they have, which are a very dynamic group of receivers, then we're going to be playing our style of football if we can keep that ball in front of us and make tackles. And I do still largely see our team as making tackles. We had busted coverage entirely against Tennessee, where a guy's just running open and runs through to the end zone on kind of a wheel route. That was one of their touchdowns. And then we saw 3 long bombs where it was one of them wasn't a 50-50. The one where Robinson was trailing. He was trailing the play. He caught up. So I guess he got there in time to make a play, but he was clearly off balance. He bangs into the receiver and he got a penalty, but he didn't get the good kind of penalty. He didn't bring the guy down. He bangs into him and interferes with him, gets the penalty thrown, but then he falls down before the ball even gets there. Wide receiver for Tennessee catches the ball and just walks basically the last 20 yards in the end zone. Almost looked like the infamous tip ball on the whatever they call it, the Miracle on the Plains or whatever, I don't remember what they called it way back when we lost to Auburn on the ball where we should have intercepted the ball, but we tipped it in the air and their guy caught it and then they win in the big comeback. And that was just, then they go on next week and they have the kick 6 and all that. And we keep hearing about that forever, right? Boo, Auburn. So that play reminded me of that. And again, as he grows up, as he plays more football, Robinson, first thing he ought to do, if he's that beat and he's going to end up interfering with the guy, then just tackle him. It's a 15-yard play. I mean, if he had tackled that guy, there's no guarantee that they would have scored a touchdown on that drive. They still would have been on their own side of the field, even after the 15-yard penalty. So, and again, they still didn't consistently drive the ball on us. They mostly hit these big hitters. So if you just, the sad truth is you don't want to sound like you're playing dirty or recommending cheating, but in every one of those at least 3 long pass touchdowns that I remember where there was a defensive back there and it was a one-on-one and we lost all 3 of those battles. Honestly, if the defensive back had just tackled the guy in every case, there's a better than average chance the defense forces them to either punt on that drive or settle for a field goal. Maybe they still score at least one of those 3 touchdowns. It's hard to say, but in all those cases, they were deep on their side of the field and they did not consistently drive the ball. So if you take away those big plays, then you maybe don't see the results that we saw in the Tennessee game. So I think that's what I'm talking about here is I expect the Georgia defense to continue winning on a lot of plays. I expect the Alabama offense, honestly, to get some yards and get some points, mostly through the air. But I think the Georgia defense will continue to feed a problem that Alabama's having, which is Alabama has not been able to consistently run the ball. We talked about that yesterday. Last year, they ran the ball. They put a respectable 173 yards a game up rushing, but 50 or 60 yards a game of that was Milroe. And you saw Milroe was an incredibly dynamic runner. So they were a much more dangerous running team than they are this year. Ty Simpson is athletic, I hear he can run, but I don't think that's the game they're looking for from him, and I don't think they're going to consistently start having him do read options and pull the ball and run consistently like the way Milroe did. And even if he's fleet of foot and pretty athletic, Milroe was, unique and special when running the ball. So their other running backs, Justice Haynes and Jam Miller, their top 2 backs last year, were good but not great. And so Justice Haynes left and he's at Michigan, and he's fantastic now at Michigan. And he's paying off all of the recruiting hype that he had coming in. Jam Miller, now that he's back from collarbone injury to start the season and he's playing his first game of the year against us this year, maybe he explodes. I certainly hope he doesn't, or if he explodes, I hope he explodes later, not today. But as I mentioned yesterday, he honestly, so far in a couple seasons, hasn't been that dynamic, especially in games like this. Win or lose against SEC teams, he tends to get about 10 carries and get about 38 to 40, 42, 45 yards. So at first I was a little, like, oh, I can't believe they're getting back their starting running back, when it's time to play us. But in reality, they're averaging about 124 yards a game rushing. Jam Miller coming back probably helps, adds to that rotation. The other guys they have in the backfield are highly recruited and supposedly talented guys too. And I say supposedly, I'm not knocking them. I don't know much about them. I just mean that thus far, it has not yielded significant results. They're not running the ball well. And on top of that, they're not really stopping the run that well either. They're still averaging giving up over 130 yards a game rushing. And again, they've played two teams that aren't very impressive. So, even if you thought Florida State was a solid win and a team back on the rise, their other two teams that they played are not good. And so where we stonewalled teams on the run, and we have improve that dynamic. We've talked about how Georgia, to get back to being Georgia, that we want to see, Georgia's got to get back to running the ball effectively and stopping the run. In the last two seasons, they'd gotten to the point where they'd bled about 50 yards a game of running that they should have been gaining while on offense, and close to 30 to 50 yards a game they were giving up more than they should have been on defense, or they had historically been doing. So this year, they're back to looking like a Georgia team. They're running for 209 yards a game through 3 games, and they're holding teams to an average of about 80. Tennessee was able to get about 125, but like we said, that's about half of what their average had been. Tennessee's been averaging 250 yards a game rushing. Their spread offense actually does feature a lot of run. So I think the Georgia defense, while there's no real statistics to back this, I think the Georgia defense, though, I think my gut says that just like Gunner, Stockton, impressed and emerged in the last game, I think either the defense as a whole or one or two of these players I've mentioned by name are going to emerge today. And I think the defense may not consistently win, much like the Tennessee game. Alabama may be successful in putting up some yards and points, but I think when it really matters and when it counts, I think the Georgia defense, I count on or believe on the Georgia defense to do just enough to help that offense overall win the game. So if anything, I might say it's a wash. Alabama may get yards and points, but the defense is going to have some winning moments and may help be decisive in the game. We already talked about special teams as swings while we think heavily in Georgia's favor and probably will against almost every team. And I think Kalen DeBoer has shown himself to be obviously a good coach to get where he is and have the kind of record he has, regardless of what the level of competition. But at this level, right now, he seems to be struggling a little bit, adjusting to what it means to be in charge of the best team, maybe in the history of college football and the best team in the history of the SEC. So it hasn't translated yet. Like we said earlier in the week, he's arguably took a team that should have been 11-2 with anybody coaching. Somebody's mom could have taken over the coaching. It feels like in a strange contest where you get to coach for a season, but it feels like last year anybody, you, me, so your mother, all should have been able to coach that Alabama team to a 10-2 record, but they ended up with 9 wins and 4 losses. So maybe 11-2, I guess, if they just go to the bowl game or make the playoffs, whatever. But you get the idea. So he objectively, what he's trying to get done at Alabama so far hasn't worked. And we'd say, okay, second year is usually when coaches often explode and really connect with their team. But then they went out in the very first game and laid an egg. They did not look competitive. So with all those matchups, I think at a minimum the special teams favors Georgia. I think Georgia offense against Bama defense is a win for Georgia. I think the Bama offense versus the Georgia defense is going to be maybe net even at worst case scenario. Possibly Georgia does better than that and emerges. So I think you can see where I'm heading as we're building towards the prediction for today's game, right? I slept on it a lot after we went all through this yesterday, and that's often what happens. I laid all that out yesterday. We talked about this. Now I slept on it, and I'm getting more confidence. Now, I think we all maybe feel a little more confidence, and I'm not sure that we should, but you probably know, or you've probably heard by now, that Florida State played a game last night. They were on the road on a Friday night game at Virginia, and they lost. They came into that game and they turned the ball over multiple times at the beginning of the game, and Virginia was able to get up 14-0. Florida State rallied back and got up 21-14. It ended up, I think, 28 all at the half, and then it was back and forth in the second half. Virginia actually had a 35-28 lead, and it was down to fourth down, last play of the game, from about the 10 or 12 yard line, and Florida State was able to pick up an amazing play. Castellanos, the quarterback, rolled out. It was the one time Virginia didn't get good pressure on those last couple plays, but he still had to roll out. He threw a pass towards the pylon in the front corner of the end zone, and the receiver was already going to the ground with the defensive player on his back, and the ball just landed right in his arms, and he kept it off the turf clearly and got a touchdown, and they tied the game with almost no time remaining, which was, I guess, about 40 seconds. Virginia had a chance to maybe get in the field goal range. They didn't do it. So then the game went to overtime. Florida State got the ball first in the first overtime and settled for the field goal. Virginia couldn't capitalize. Another field goal. Then they go to the second overtime, and then Virginia just takes control of the game. They score the touchdown and the 2-point conversion, and Florida State doesn't even manage to they get forced into a terrible fourth down play. That really never had much of a chance. It's picked off in the end zone, and Virginia wins, and Florida State goes down. And it was the quickest field rush. You need to find the video if you haven't seen it. It was the quickest field rush onslaught I've ever seen. The entire field was swarmed, and I think I read a couple articles, and it looks like everybody was okay, but you almost worried about a stampede kind of situation. I mean, at least football players are wearing helmets and pads, right? So you never think about that protecting you from the fans. But the student section stands on a hill, a little bit like at Clemson, on one side, and as that built the tension, just sending it to overtime just added to the tension. The students were ready to pour on the field when they thought they had the game won in regulation, and then Florida State ties it up on the last play of the game, and it goes to overtime. But you could just see the students creeping down the hill and getting closer and closer to that back end zone and just ready to explode. They were just dying to bust onto that field and celebrate a win. And so when Virginia finally does pull it off in the second overtime, now the anticipation is just ridiculous. And I mean, as soon as that Virginia player got his hands on the ball in the end zone and the two players went to the ground, there were already dozens of fans streaming into the back of the end zone, and they swarmed and overwhelmed. It looked like floodwaters breaking through from a dam, just overwhelming. Like the players that had gone to the ground making the play were just gone in a sea of humanity in a second. And it was, and again, you almost feared for their safety, even though they're football players in football gear. I'm sure they were fine, I guess, but yeah, it was an unbelievable scene. The Virginia kids just swarmed the field. Virginia's now 4-1. FSU's apparent rise back to the top 10. I mean, it wasn't an apparent rise. They were number 8 coming in this game, but off of the Alabama win, and again, a couple patsies. And this goes back to what we've been talking about. They played, Kent State and nobody else. They'd kind of been off the radar. They'd been clubbing everybody they've been playing, like 66-0 or whatever in the couple games since the Alabama game. And so between the Alabama game and the way they beat down these small teams, everybody's thinking, look, Florida State's back. They're going to be a player this year. And everybody's really probably looking ahead. Maybe Florida State's looking ahead to next week's Miami-Florida State matchup. And for the first time in a decade or more, you might have seen Miami-Florida State, where both teams are in the top 10 and competing for something. They're still going to be competing for something. Florida State's going to be still a top 25 team. But they lost this game, and this was a game that was, back and forth. It was all over the place. Both teams had 2 or 3 turnovers. Both teams ran up about 500 yards. I think Virginia actually had about 440 yards. FSU had over 500 yards. But all of a sudden now we got to look at this FSU team that we were thinking, hey, maybe they're back. Maybe they're a top contender again. They're a playoff contender. Maybe they're going to win the ACC. And Alabama went on the road and maybe faced a tougher team than we thought. Well, this either speaks to going on the road or it just speaks to the parity in college football. I don't know what it speaks to yet. Honestly, it's too early. And it just happened last night, so I haven't really had a time to study it, think through it, and say, what does this mean? But Florida State went down, and it certainly, none of us expected Florida State that beat Alabama by 2 touchdowns to go on the road and lose to Virginia. And Virginia is 4-1 now and 2-0 in the conference, the ACC, and they're not playing Miami or Clemson, I think, this year. I haven't studied their schedule. I just what I saw in a quick article. But point of that is, look, maybe now Virginia's a player for the ACC championship game, like Georgia Tech, who also has a favorable schedule. So that conference looks more wide open than we thought, but this doesn't give us the same feeling about the Alabama team we're facing now that we see that the team that beat them by 2 touchdowns and made them look uninspiring and uninspired could go on the road and lose to a team that, frankly, we wouldn't expect to win. Now, Virginia actually has a strange history of beating FSU when nobody else in the country, during FSU's epic run of 14 straight years of finishing in the top 5 or higher. A feat, by the way, that even Nick Saban didn't accomplish. Saban had a couple teams that were like 7th, 8th, 10th in the final rankings. Even Nick Saban didn't mirror Bobby Bowden's 14 straight years of finishing 5th or higher in the polls, which is an astounding thing. Even during that run, oddly enough, Virginia was the team that, this is like the 4th time Virginia has beat FSU when they were a top-ranked team, or a ranked team, maybe even a top 10 team. I'm not exactly sure on that statistic, but it's like the 4th time. And a couple of those times were quite famous, and you might remember them, like Virginia's beating FSU when nobody else in the country could regularly beat FSU. And Virginia had a run in the 90s where they were the number 1 team in the country. In fact, in the 1990 season, when Georgia Tech ascended to number 1, split the national championship like we talked about, Virginia spent a lot of that year undefeated and the number 1 team in the country. And one of the big games that elevated Tech from maybe to possible real legit number 1 national championship contender was an epic showdown of undefeated Georgia Tech and undefeated Virginia. Or maybe they each had, or maybe one of them had a tie or something. I don't remember. But anyway, it was an epic showdown. And Georgia Tech came away the winner in that game, and it really propelled their season forward. So anyway, point is, Virginia, not a team you expect to take down the blue bloods and the heavyweights of college football, even though it was on the road. So again, maybe this speaks to the parity. Maybe this speaks to the road. I did see an article. I don't know any details, but I did see an article that instead of firing their coach, the other thing I was going to say, Virginia's coach, Tony Scott, came into the game or into the season on the hot seat, has not really won. This is like his 4th season, and he's one of those coaches who was at risk coming into the season. Well, guess what? Now he's 4-1. The one loss was to NC State, which somehow is not a conference game. I don't totally understand that, but whatever. He lost to NC State. I don't know how that's going to age, but again, they're a contender in their conference right now, and they took down FSU. And he certainly doesn't look like he's on the hot seat at the moment because it wasn't just this random win, but they are 2-0 in the conference and 4-1 overall. They might sneak into the top 25 this week, depending on what other action happens. And all of that speaks well to Virginia, but still, that's not. It cuts at what we think Florida State could have been, and that cuts at what we think Alabama is. So. I checked the line to see if it changed the line this morning. That the team that beat Alabama lost. It didn't. We're still 2.5-point favorite, so that didn't change much. ESPN's FPI index simulation thing that puts a percentage, a chance to win, did go up a little bit. We were 54.8% favored to win according to that ESPN metric, and now it's like 55.8 or something. So we got like a point out of that, and I'm sure that. They keep running the simulations over and over again. I'm sure one of the data points from that is that FSU lost. I'm sure that's part of what changed the equation a little bit for Alabama. So, but Vegas hasn't changed things a lot coming into this game. So, let me just go through one other thing. I saved this from yesterday, and so what I wanted to look at was Florida State I mean, Florida State. I don't know why. Now I'm struggling whenever I bring up Florida State to keep Florida State, Alabama separate. But okay, so Alabama has lost 5 games, like we've said, under Kalen DeBoer, which is an incredible amount compared to where Nick Saban would have been at any point like this. And one of the things I've noticed is all these games have some things that look similar. Okay, so we're going to go through them real quick in order that they came. So last season, their first loss after beating us, they turn around and they lose to Vanderbilt 40-35. And that was a game that really announced that Vanderbilt was for real, right? And what happened in that game? Milroe was 18 of 24 for 310 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But on the run side, again, they could not run the ball. 21 carries, 84 yards is all they had in the game. Jam Miller, 5 carries, 45 yards. That's actually a nice average. He had 2 touchdowns, so he was effective, but he didn't get the ball fed a lot. Nobody else really did much. Justice Haynes was 6 carries, 23 yards, nothing to speak of. Milroe himself was bottled up. He only had 10 yards on 7 carries, and I think he did get a touchdown, so he was responsible for 1 throwing touchdown, 1 passing touchdown. But and Pavia was successful in the game. He was 16 of 21 for 252 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he also ran the ball 20 times for 56 yards. Not a great average, but again, they held the ball. As a team, they outrushed Alabama. They ran the ball 54 times for 166 yards. So what they were able to do is they racked up 418 yards. Alabama had just under 400 yards, but Vandy held the ball 42 minutes to Alabama's 17 minutes. And so it was a close game, 5-point game, right? So it could have been anybody's game. And down the stretch, but Vandy had pulled away. It was 40-28 in the fourth quarter. Vandy scored their last touchdown with 5 minutes to play. Alabama was able to come back and get a touchdown on the board and make it the 5-point game. But Vandy was up by 12 late in the game. And Vandy had led in the second quarter. Vandy was up 23-7 at one point. So Vandy was able to consistently drive the ball. They were able to consistently run the ball. Alabama could not run the ball. Milroe was good. Not great. He had an interception, and he was not able to run the ball. And again, my concept is, I've said, DeBoer puts the game on his quarterback. So Milroe was good, not great. Their defense was not able to stop Tennessee or Vanderbilt from consistently possessing the ball. Vanderbilt, again, they had 418 yards. A nice game, but I mean, it wasn't like a 500-yard. Sometimes you see 40 points on the game in regulation. You might think they put 500 points up, or 500 plus yards. They did not. 418 yards, but they held the ball for over 40 minutes. So Alabama's defense was not able to control the game. Vanderbilt's offense was. And Milroe did a lot, but not enough to save them. The next loss was against Tennessee. They lost 24-17. So this is still a 1-score game, lower scoring. What happened in the game? Milroe was 25 of 45. So they forced Milroe into a ton of passes, 45. Same thing we talked about. He only averaged 5.3 yards a pass. 239 yards doesn't look bad, but 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So they forced him into mistakes. They forced him to throw the ball a lot. He barely completed 50% of his passes, or low passing percent. He didn't, what I'm looking at is 60, 70% or above is good. 60% is good, 70% is outstanding. Gunner's completing 71% of his passes right now. I think Ty Simpson for Alabama coming into the game is completing, I don't know, like 80% of his passes. It's an insane amount. But Milroe in this game, where they lost to Tennessee, was only 25 of 45. So that's over 50%, but not a lot. And 2 interceptions, only 5.3 yards carry. Again, run game, they ran the ball 34 times, Alabama did, for only 75 yards. Jam Miller was 12 carries for 42 yards, no touchdowns. So ineffective running. Tennessee stuffed the run. Nico was the Tennessee quarterback. He was not amazing. He was 14 of 27 for 194 yards, a touchdown interception. But he also added another 44 yards on the ground. And Dylan Sampson, their awesome running back last year, was able to grind out 139 yards on 26 carries. Overall, Tennessee ran the ball 43 times for 214 yards. And so Alabama only ran the ball for 75 yards. Tennessee ran for over 200. Quarterback play in both. Milroe was disappointing. Not terrible, but definitely held in check. Oh, and on his run game, he ran the ball 14 times for only 11 yards. So again, Tennessee bottled up their run game, including Milroe. And put the ball in his arms. He threw the ball 45 times. He wasn't able to win the game for them doing that. Nico was good for Tennessee, but not amazing. It was mostly about stuffing the run and themselves being able to run the ball. And same thing, that was a back and forth game. Alabama actually did have a lead in the fourth quarter. Tennessee came back, took the lead, and then padded it a little bit and was able to have a nice win there. Overall, Tennessee had 408 yards. Alabama had 314. And actually, Alabama did win the time of possession in that one. But, again, Tennessee is horrible at time of possession. We've talked about that before. The next loss in the season was probably the most troubling for a lot of people. That was the loss late in the year against Oklahoma. Alabama goes on the road. And remember, all three of these games so far are on the road. Alabama goes on the road against Oklahoma, and they lose 24-3. So this is a low-scoring beatdown. What happened in the game? Milroe was 11 of 26. That's not good at all. 164 yards. He threw 3 interceptions, averaged only 6.3 yards a pass. Were they able to run the ball? No. They tried. They ran the ball 30 times for only 70 yards. Jam Miller, again, having the same game. Again, 12 carries, 45 yards, and no touchdowns. So that is Jam Miller's game. That is what he has done against SEC foes. So I say that. I hope I don't get embarrassed, and I hope he doesn't explode against us today. But that's what he's been doing in SEC games that matter. What did Oklahoma do? Oklahoma got rid of their quarterback from last year. He's at Auburn now. They booed him off the field, and he had to go find a new home and kind of reset. And they got a new guy this year. Well, Jackson Arnold in that game, 9 of 11 passing for 68 yards. I mean, nothing there really, but 9 of 11. So, and he didn't, no interception. So he took care of the ball and he made a couple passes, but he ran the ball 25 times for 131 yards. Okay, with a long of 28. And their running back, Xavier Robinson, ran the ball 18 times for 107 yards. They had 2 guys rush for over 100 yards against that Bama defense last year. So Oklahoma, 50 rushes for 257 yards, a 5.1 yard per carry average, and 2 touchdowns in the game. So they controlled the game with the run game. They forced Milroe into a bad game. Milroe had nothing running. Again, 15 carries for 7 yards, only 164 yards passing on less than 50% passing, 3 interceptions. So they harassed Milroe. They caused trouble for him. The run game was non-existent. They only rushed for 70 yards. And in the meantime, Oklahoma only threw for 68 yards, but ran for 257 yards. So it turned into a low-scoring beatdown. Oklahoma put 325 yards of offense up against Alabama's 234, and Alabama had 3 turnovers and lost the time of possession battle, 35-25, just about. So again, very similar pattern. What do you see in all these? All 3 are on the road. All 3, Alabama averages about 70 yards rushing, while the other team runs for over 200 yards, and the other team mostly controls the clock. Tennessee gave up some clock. But Tennessee was also the only team to trail in these games too. Oklahoma, actually Alabama started the Oklahoma game with a field goal, then it was 3-3, then Oklahoma was 10-3, then 17-3, and then 24-3. Alabama just never got anything going. Then in the bowl game last year against Michigan, let's speed through this a little bit more and call it a day here. Jalen Milroe, bowl game against Michigan. They lose in a neutral site game. He's 16 of 32, close to 50%, 192 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Running the ball, Milroe is only 16 carries for 7 yards. And what did Jam Miller do, you ask? He had 10 carries for 27 yards. Overall, Alabama ran the ball 29 times for just 68 yards against Michigan. While Michigan didn't blow it away, they ran the ball 51 times for 115 yards. That's not awesome. There's a lot of sack yardage in there or lost plays. There's a couple plays in here. 3 different guys are on there. There's a team loss of 3. Somebody named Kendrick Bell lost 13 yards. Davis Warren lost 14 yards. So they had a running back, Jordan Marshall, Michigan did, that went for 100 yards on 23 carries. And then they had another guy, Benjamin Hall. He had 16 carries for 28 yards. That's not very impressive. But they did certainly outrush Michigan, or they certainly outrushed Alabama, and their quarterback, who was nobody's pick for anything, and they've already jettisoned him for a new guy this year. He was 9 of 12 for 73 yards and 1 touchdown. So again, same thing like the Oklahoma game. They didn't even pass for 100 yards, but they didn't make mistakes. They didn't turn the ball over. They threw a few passes and they ran the ball a lot. And what was the time of possession in this game? Let's take a look. Michigan held the ball 38 minutes. So their run game was somewhat stifled. They only gained 115 net yards with the sacks and lost yardage plays. They gained more like 140, 150 yards without that. And they didn't throw for even 100 yards. But They didn't turn the ball over much. Alabama had 3 turnovers. They had the time of possession, 38 minutes to 21 minutes for Alabama. Alabama outgained them in the game, 260 yards to 190. So Alabama lost a game that they only allowed 190 yards of offense to the other team. But the other team outrushed them and outpossessed the ball. And Alabama was not able, and they were harassed, and their quarterback play was stymied. The game was on Milroe's hands, and he was not able to win it. Now, there's a bunch of games in here I could show you where Milroe won the game. And that's my point, is that DeBoer puts the game on the quarterback. And if the quarterback is able to win, then they can win the game. If the quarterback is not able to win and the other team just outrushes them, then Alabama is in trouble, especially on these road or neutral site games. And we've already talked about the FSU game, but let's look at that one last time. So what happened there? Ty Simpson, 23 of 43, his worst game by completion percentage, 5.9 yard average for completions. He threw 2 touchdowns. Again, he's not the problem here. The problem was he was harassed. But what did they do running the ball? 29 carries for 87 yards. Now, Jam Miller was hurt to start the season, but like we said, we're not seeing Jam Miller, even though he's their starting running back, we're not seeing him as the answer to the run game. When they've lost, when they go on the road and they lose, it's because the team gets stuffed and they can't even gain 100 yards. And it doesn't matter whether they had Justice Haynes, who's killing it at Michigan, or Jam Miller, or even Milroe, who was a dynamic runner. When they got stuffed and under 100 yards, they lost the game. And that's a scheme problem more than anything, or a blocking problem. Whatever it is, it's not the talent. I mean, Justice Haynes I would have loved to have seen Justice Haynes come to Georgia, and he didn't. And we had a second crack at it when he left Alabama last year, and he went to Michigan. And he's just killing it. Again, he's had like 4 75-yard touchdowns. He's got 100 and something yards in every game. And as a feature back, he's loving life in Michigan. So it wasn't that he couldn't be that guy here. And Alabama, without Jam Miller or Justice Haynes, has some other guys who were, top 10 running back recruits in whatever year they came in. I don't remember them all. I'm not going to dig into that. But what happened? What did Florida State do? Again, Castellanos was 9 of 14 for 152 yards. Okay, decent completion percentage, decent yardage, nothing special. No touchdowns. He averaged 10.9 yards a throw, but no touchdowns, no interceptions. But he ran the ball 16 times for 78 yards and a touchdown. And the rest of the team racked up another 30 carries plus. And as a team, they had 230 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. And that's how they beat Alabama. So again, Alabama goes on the road. Their quarterback play was the worst it had been this far in any other game this season. Not bad. Ty Simpson was still decent, okay, but not as good as he has been. But the game was on his shoulders, and with the game on his shoulders and no support from the run game, wasn't able to win the game. In the meantime, the defense allowed 230 yards rushing from Florida State. I don't know a ton about the Florida State players, and I will say that in this game where they lost they lost yesterday to Virginia. They were, did I have anything about that? I thought I had that, whatever. What I can say is that, like I said, Virginia put up 400 something yards offense. Mostly their quarterback, Chandler Morris, had a pretty big game, but they did consistently run the ball. I don't have the stats in front of me. For some reason, I thought I did, but I can just tell you that they did consistently run the ball. Virginia did. So yet again, Florida State, that's what Florida State did. So, but I guess that doesn't really have any relation. What I'm trying to say is that Florida State also, I think I lost the point entirely. I think it was confusing. I'm sorry. I apologize. The main idea, let's go back to it, is we see a pattern. And I went through the 5 Alabama losses now, 1 this year, last year. The main idea is that rushing the ball mattered. I guess it doesn't matter at all whether or not Florida State or Virginia rushed the ball against each other. Florida State is the team that beat Alabama so far this year. When they played Alabama, they rushed the ball for 230 yards. They did run the ball fine against Virginia yesterday. I don't think that's super important. They're a decent running team. I guess what I was trying to say is I'm not sure that anybody on FSU's team is like, oh, I wish I had that running back. I sort of keep saying, oh, all these great things about Justice Haynes, right? And I'm not trying to knock our guys. I'm really impressed and excited about our guys and what I think they're going to do this year. But I guess that was my key point, is I was trying to say, look, there's nobody on Florida State's stable of runners that makes me think, wow, I really wish we had that guy. I mean, Castellanos is a gamer, and he led the team in yardage and carries against Alabama. And again, we can do that. We've seen Gunner do that. So I think that this game sets up well for Georgia. I think where Alabama is consistently in trouble. And that's the thing, is you look at something, you say, is it a fluke? How did we lose this time? How did they lose this time? And what I haven't done is I haven't picked apart, I guess you could say, you could be fair, we've lost 3 times last year. So I could go through and pick apart Georgia's losses and say what happened. Well, I can tell you a little bit. I mean, I went back and looked at them a little bit. So we lost Alabama, and we already know about that. We talked about that. That game was what it was. You know, everything went wrong at the beginning. We tightened the ship, and then we dominated the rest of the game until until Alabama's last time with the ball, and then we lost it there. And we lost it there because when you leave yourself that little margin and it's a coin flip is a 50-50 thing. So when you say the game comes down to either team can win or who has the ball last, well, that's a lot of, I mean, statistically speaking, no matter how good you are, you're more likely than not to split games that come down to who has the ball last. And so, and unfortunately in that one, it went Alabama's way. And so we know what happened there. And I don't know if that tells us a lot, although it is worth noting that the Tennessee game looked a lot like that. And this time the coin flipped in our favor. So it was a similar thing. Tennessee didn't jump up to a 28-0 lead, but they got a 21-7 lead in the first quarter. We dominated the second and third quarters, got back to having a lead. This time we were able to have a little bit more durable lead, and then we had more time to respond back and forth. We still could have lost the game, though, because Tennessee ultimately was going to have the ball last, and they just didn't make the field goal that would have allowed them to win the game. So, you know, in that game, it worked out. And that's what I'm saying. You don't want to be in this position if you can avoid it. That's what overwhelming talent that we used to have in 2021 and 2022 did, is even against other teams, you just overwhelm them. Even on the road, you overwhelm them. Well, we don't have the overwhelming talent. Alabama doesn't have overwhelming talent, certainly over us. So they've had this little bit of a hex against us. But there is a pattern to how to beat Alabama. One, get them on the road. Check. We've got that. So they come in having lost all 5 of the games that they've lost in the last year and a quarter, either on the road or neutral site. Well, we got them on the road. We come in with a 33-game home winning streak. Great, we're at home. So that's something heavily in our favor. Alabama's team right now looks good on paper, and we both do. That's what happens a lot in this early season, especially when you played one power team and 2 not-so-power teams. But what can we draw from that? Well, it is concerning that Alabama, if you're an Alabama fan, I think the things I'd be concerned about are the fact that the defense is still giving up too much rushing yard. They're still being outrushed in games this year, despite how they're playing. They've been outrushed so far in games. They're giving up an average of 138. They're only running for 124. Jam Miller coming back doesn't look like he, at least in SEC games, is that dynamic guy who's going to radically change that. He does give you another back, and there's more people to rotate. But especially without Milroe, it looks like Alabama's run game has taken a step back. And all those losses we just talked about, Milroe was contained. So again, without a dynamic running quarterback, and I didn't go through the wins, but when you go back through Alabama's wins involved a dynamic running quarterback succeeding and winning. So, and when teams were able to keep Milroe off the board, keep the rest of the team off the board as far as rushing, held them to 100 yards. And look, most teams are going to lose games if they can't run for 100 yards. That's not exactly a revelation. The revelation here is that Alabama is consistently playing quality teams on the road, and in those games they can't even get to 100 yards. And if you contain their quarterback, and DeBoer puts the game on his quarterback, so is he expecting Simpson to run like Milroe ran? No. So actually they even need more. It puts their offense in an even more precarious situation this year, because they can't, like us or like Alabama last year, just hope, if nothing else goes right, that Milroe will bail them out, or that the run will bail them out. They need the completed pass to make this game work. So the advantage is Georgia plays every game trying to start with what can we take away from the other team. And 99% of the time, what Kirby Smart and company want to take away from the other team is the run. And Alabama looks primed to take the runaway. It looks like they're already doing that for us to a certain degree in these kind of games, or not already doing it for us. You got to go out and execute, but it looks doable. Okay. So again, I think the Georgia defense can win more often than not, or enough for us to win this game, because I think they can go out there and take the run away from Alabama and put the game on Ty Simpson's shoulders entirely in the passing game. Does that mean they'll connect on some passes? Well, as talented as he is and as talented as those wide receivers are, I would think it makes sense that he's going to win some games, or he's going to win some battles. Isaiah Horton, I've mentioned him before. He looks really great as a young wide receiver. They've got, Ryan Williams and then Jeremy Bernard, who came over from Washington, but is probably their most consistent wide receiver. I mean, he, even against Florida State, even in the loss against Florida State, Jeremy Bernard had 8 catches, 146 yards. So we could see something like that happen today. We could see one or more of their receivers have a big game. And ultimately, though, with no run game and no consistent moving the ball, if Georgia can consistently move the ball and control the game, like all these other teams have done, own the time of possession, own the control of the game, we may not grind out, put 500 yards and 40 points up while we hold them to 250 yards and 13 points. We might. That could happen. If they get in trouble, if we are able to create turnovers, not just sacks and pressure and tackles for loss and stop the run game, but if we're actually able to get turnovers and we don't give up turnovers, then yeah, it could turn into a blowout. Georgia could win 38 to 17, something like that, maybe. I mean, I think that's in the cards. But I think the more likely scenario here is, I think Vegas is right till nearly the end. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a nip and tuck game. I think it's going to feel like Georgia's controlling it, but because Alabama has that big play potential, and they snap off a couple plays here and a couple plays there, it's amazing when you're playing and you've dominated the game, but you're only up, say, 13 points, in the game. It's amazing how quick you pucker up and you get tight when you see that other team. Because, like, let's say you have been controlling the game and you're up 13 points and it's the third quarter and you're feeling pretty good. It's like, if we could just get the ball and score one more time, go get a touchdown, go up by 20 points, then this game be over. Well, maybe all of a sudden that's when you give up that 50-yard, Alabama suddenly drives out to midfield and then they hit a 50-yard pass to Ryan Williams on busted coverage. And then he scores a touchdown. All of a sudden your 13-point lead is 6. Now you're not even a full score up, right? And now you start to tighten up a little bit. So I think maybe something like that seems like the flow. Maybe Georgia's able to control the game early. Alabama's able to fight back, but not on consistent driving, but a busted play here, a busted play there. I think the defense might give one or two of those up, but not as many as they did against Tennessee. And but then I think maybe we get the ball back and we grind it out, or we hit a big play or two or whatever. We put a score on late, and I think maybe we end up winning this game by 10 or 13 points. But it might be that one score game, or maybe it's even only the 3-point game like Vegas thinks, right until near the end. So I think we exercise some demons today. I think we win the game, score-wise. What do I think it would be, or what's that going to look like? I'm thinking that maybe it's something like a 17-14 game in the fourth quarter. So if we score that touchdown, maybe we end up winning, 24-17, or that would be a one-score game, obviously. So maybe it gets to be 27-17. I think seems like if we're able to pull away and score by a couple, that's the more likely scenario. I think there's a lesser scenario where we just keep applying pressure. The defense feeds on the crowd energy. They start out strong and we trade for a while and it's a pretty even game, and then we just keep applying and applying. We chop wood, and we just keep building, and we slowly build a bigger lead and win by maybe more, maybe a more impressive beat. By the end, it looks like some of those Tennessee games, like last year's Tennessee game, that when you get to the end, it's 31-17. You're like, well, and the game wasn't really as close as the score. Tennessee was just able to score early, but after that, they did nothing. That's another scenario that I think is maybe the second most likely scenario. Obviously, Alabama could win this game, and especially if we make a lot of mistakes. But so far, again, Gunner has protected the ball. He's been strip sacked, but he hasn't thrown any interceptions. He hasn't just been careless with the ball or put it on the ground, missed his exchanges, or fumbled the ball lightly. He's been solid with the ball. He's completing 71% of his passes. He grinds out yards and runs. We keep making forward progress. And I don't think there's any reason to think he won't do that. And if the defense can have a few people respond and step up like Gunner did, then I think we could easily hit these predictions I'm talking about. So I think, Obviously, the other idea is that, DeBoer knows they've lost on the road. This is his big chance. Alabama's back's against the wall a little bit. They come out swinging. Other than throwing haymaker after haymaker, just downfield, downfield, and they might. I give DeBoer a lot of credit. I think he knows what I know, which is, and I've said this before. Look, the best way to beat Georgia is probably to just keep gunning downfield. I would be mad as a head coach if I went up against Georgia and I didn't have at least one 30 to 50 yard downfield attempt on every drive, because I think that's the best way to beat us. You're not going to consistently, no matter what you've seen you think about the defense this year, good, bad. The defense from the first two games, it was choking everybody off and looked hard to even move the ball on. The defense that gave up 500 yards to Tennessee, whichever one you think it is, even over the last year or two, our defense has taken a step back. And given up some big yards and big plays in big games. They also always have a period like the Alabama game last year, the Tennessee game this year, where they still turn it around and dominate. They have that potential. They don't just get beat all game long with no response. And so I think that I don't see it likely that Alabama is able to just come in and bomb away and then just run away with it, and then just play keep away, just beat us down. I don't think that's a very likely scenario. I called it at maybe 20% yesterday, as when I broke down, the three true outcomes: Bama wins big, we win big, or it's a nip and tuck game. And what I said yesterday was 20% Alabama wins big, 30% we win big, 50% it's nip and tuck. So I still live with that. And again, as I slept on it, the obvious math of that is, we're not guaranteed to win the nip and tuck game, but we're at home, and that often creates that just a little bit of extra advantage, right? Didn't work for Tennessee last time, but hey. So you would say the nip and tuck game favors us, and so we have a slight edge, and that's where Vegas sees it. But I think there's a chance it could really go well. I really want to. I think the crowd and just the momentum and everything could really feed on. I think it would have been tough maybe to come off last week's game and come. I think this off week has worked well. Both teams had the off week, so they have the same advantage in one way, but I think it was good for us to be able to work hard for another week and then look forward to and hear about. The other thing that's really good is, if we had been the other way, if we'd been, won 6 of the last 7 against Alabama, then maybe we rest on our laurels a little bit after the big Tennessee win. But I think the guys are motivated for 2 weeks knowing about what they heard. And I think the defense is motivated to come out and really put on a performance. So that's where I think we're going to go. I think Georgia wins the game. I think there's plenty of scenarios where they don't. I think it's close and tight. I think it's more likely to be, even if we win big, close early, and then maybe we just grind and pull away. But there's always a chance we come out gunning and just jump out to a big lead and dominate. We've won a lot of games convincingly that way. That seems least likely to me in the scenarios that are available. So, look, we've gone deep and long. I wanted to encourage you. There's a lot of great games out there, and with already time to be thinking about some of those. This is on our grid system that we've been talking about games. I had 5 games on the schedule that are games that we're watching these teams carefully because we think they're on our watch list of playoff teams, or they're playing somebody who's good enough to give them trouble or is a traditional rival. So you have our game, Illinois USC. USC is so far looking sharp. Who knows if it's a mirage or not? Illinois got blasted by Indiana last week and moves out of playoff contention. And I always thought it was charity that they were there, but they were number 9, so we were keeping an eye on them. They are fully dismissed if they lose this game, and USC emerges as that team we got to keep an eye on in the Big Ten. That could be, as one of the commentators out there used to say, the fly in the ointment. Because I'm not sure that I'm ready to think of USC as a real contender, but they're going to play some of those contenders out there. And so since they've got a game against Oregon, so they've got other games out there where they could have something to say about it. Ole Miss LSU is certainly going to be, like I said, the winner of that game is going to have a huge step in the direction of who's at least going to be contending for the SEC. Ole Miss was a contender last year but came up short. People thought they took a step back this year, and they are not as good defensively, but they are winning shootouts. And, Lane Kiffin is always going to be dangerous for that. LSU's offense hasn't been able to get out of gear yet, but suddenly they have a defense. Last couple of years they had no defense, but their offense was great. If they suddenly were to iron that out and have both, then they're really dangerous. And if they do that today against Ole Miss, that might change how we think about them. And we think positive. I mean, right now they haven't looked, like we said, their wins, their signature wins have not aged well, but they still won the game, and there's both of those games, and they're still undefeated. And they still have the talent now on defense and theoretically on offense to be dangerous. So we'll keep an eye on LSU. Texas A&M and Auburn. Auburn looked like they were on the rise. They played well against Oklahoma, and there's a lot of crowing about the illegal play that the ref should have called a penalty on that resulted in a touchdown in a one-score game that you lose by on the road. You're certainly going to feel hard done by that. So Texas A&M had the big win against Notre Dame. Notre Dame is 0-2. Everybody talks about, well, yeah, but they played well in both games. Okay, fine. You can play well in all. Look, I've seen plenty of teams who played well in all their games and still went 6-5, which means they're not a contender and they don't matter. So that's probably not going to happen to Notre Dame because they don't have a schedule that's going to have that many teams. But I tend to look at it as, yeah, they played tough and they played well, but they have two teams on their schedule coming into the season, Notre Dame did, that were ranked teams, and they lost to both of them. So I don't care if it was close or late. They lost both games. So, and I'm not going to be impressed probably by what they do with the rest of their schedule. But we'll have to see. That comparative logic will have to matter. Other teams on Notre Dame's schedule will have to rise up and look better. And they're playing Arkansas today, which, again, you never know what you're going to get from Arkansas. So maybe the real Notre Dame, if Arkansas they're at home. Notre Dame's at Arkansas. What a weird game. Or Notre Dame had to go. They went to A&M last year. They had A&M at home this year, but now they're going to Arkansas. So I would not have called that a grid game, and Notre Dame is kind of out of my grid now too, but that's an interesting game. But Texas A&M Auburn, that is an interesting game. So Texas A&M, they beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame is probably a legitimately decent team, probably finishes the year as a top 25 team. I just don't think they're really a playoff team, it looks like this year. And Auburn, they were hard done maybe last week. If they'd won that game, we'd have a whole different perspective about them. If just like what we said about Alabama, if they lose this game, now they got 2 losses in the SEC, and it's going to be hard for them to compete. We don't know if we really thought they were competing, but they want to get back to making noise, and starting 0-2 in the conference is not making the noise they want to make. So those are, but A&M is in that grid. A&M is one of the contenders, and so how they play against Auburn is still, Auburn is one of those teams that could, whether they're in the playoff contention or not, they're going to have a say in what happens with us, Alabama, Texas A&M, a bunch of teams in the SEC that are going to contend. So that's an important game. It's a grid game. We're going to take a look at it. There's a bunch of games out there, though. I mean, almost every top 25 team is playing somebody significant. Georgia Tech's playing Wake Forest. Sometimes that's a problem for them. They're on the road. That could be a problem. They should win that game. It's the kind of game, though, that they've stumbled over in the past. USC and Illinois, we talked about that. Notre Dame, Arkansas. Vanderbilt's playing Utah State. Who cares? Washington, Ohio State could be a sneaky, interesting game. Ohio State beat Texas. Texas has struggled. Texas has a good defense, but no offense. Ohio State really hasn't played anybody either, much like Florida State getting the big win in week 1 over Alabama, and then beating a couple patsies and getting a lot of praise. Ohio State beat Texas, beat a couple patsies, had a lot of praise, sitting as the undisputed number 1 in a lot of people's mind. They go on the road at Washington, who is 3-0, and could be on the rise. So, Vegas only sees that as an 8.5-point game for Ohio State. That still means, they're going on the road and favored, but anyway, that's one to keep an eye on. I mean, I'm not calling anything there. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just saying that's an interesting game. Indiana, Iowa, maybe Iowa's traditional defense slows down that Indiana game. We'll take a look. I'm not ready to be a believer in Indiana, but there's a lot of people saying Indiana's legit. So we'll know more. Tennessee plays Mississippi State on the road. Mississippi State, by the way, again, 4-0. And they were forgotten, and Arizona State got themselves back on the map last night. They lost to Mississippi State. That's their one loss. They fell out of the top 25. They were in the playoff last year, as you might remember. We've discussed that. Well, Arizona State played a game last night, beat TCU, who was getting a lot of love as maybe the Big 12 team to keep an eye on. Well, Arizona State came back from unranked, beat ranked TCU. Maybe they got themselves back in it, and their one loss is to Mississippi State. Tennessee goes on the road to play Mississippi State. That's one to keep an eye on too. That may not be such a, that may not be a cakewalk. So who knows? I have no idea what Mississippi State really is or not. I just know they're 4-0 and they beat Arizona State, and Arizona State is not terrible. Iowa State, Arizona, I don't know what to think about that. Missouri is playing Massachusetts, who cares? And Colorado, BYU's ranked, but I'm not ready to spend much time on that. So anyway, a lot of games to keep an eye on. As a Georgia fan, a lot. We'll talk about those, and we'll see. Hopefully we are all super enthused when we come back together either tomorrow or Monday after the big win against Alabama, and then we're really excited to look at all these other games and compare our team to them and say, what does that mean? Who are we going to be playing? Where are we going to be in the playoff? Who do we care about? It'll be harder if we lose, right? Then we'll be down in the dumps and we'll think we're not the team that we hoped we were, and maybe it doesn't matter. We don't need to worry about what other teams are doing to the playoff. All we care about is how are we going to get back into contention, right? We're not going to be out of contention no matter what happens here, I think. Let's keep that in mind. So listen, I hope you have a great game day. You got a lot of time to kill as we work our way, and that's why I tell you about all this football. There's a lot of football you can keep an eye on and get ready as we build towards our game. This is a huge game. If just for bragging rights, if for what it means, again, it might not decide anything in the conference or nationally, but this is a game as a Georgia fan. I think this is the last hurdle that we need to climb, which is getting back on top of not letting anybody own us. It makes no sense that Kalen DeBoer, no matter how good he is as a coach, is able to come in his first year when he otherwise completely disappointed at Alabama and took the team probably backwards from where it should have been, but yet somehow still managed to beat Georgia and Kirby Smart. So I think it's time for Georgia to assert itself, get back on top of that, and I think we have the right setup for it for all the reasons I said. So I hope you have a great game day Saturday in Athens. I hope you have a great Saturday overall. You enjoy some great football. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about it when it's all over. I'm sure I'll be, if it's a close game or an exciting game like the Tennessee game, I will probably try to come back with some content tomorrow. If it's a loss, I'll probably ruminate and maybe just stew on it, and we'll come back on Monday and we'll break it down and we'll start trying to make ourselves feel better as we move on to the rest of the season. So just to give you a little heads up, that's what I'm thinking will probably happen. Have a great game day. It's Saturday in Athens. Nothing could be finer. Go Dogs.